I'm Carrie Breschi. I'm from Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and I am a first-year graduate student in this program at Moore, this great program called Social Engagement Through the Arts.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Huewayne Watson. I am a teacher, community organizer, artist, and a first-year student in the MFA program in community practice.
So I'm going to echo some of what Jane was talking about, which, by the way, you're a rock star, Jane, especially to people like us. Huewayne and I were talking about the audience, and we were talking about, for us, the audience is like a piece of art in and of itself. We have these intelligent thinkers, these creative makers, but what's the most beautiful thing about this audience is that the hearts are all collectively molding to make a difference. And I think, and Jane, what you were saying, Matisse said, creativity takes courage. And he wasn't talking about the courage of the outcome, he was talking about the process. And he was talking about pushing boundaries, being daring. And in the words of our keynote speaker, he was talking about building ethical and effective new structures, new lenses, and new senses. He was talking about being courageous and in our communities having hope. And it's the hope that makes the changes. And thank you, Risë, for giving me some tools and wanting to obtain and inspire me to have the tools for that hope.
And so I will add Risë Wilson, inaugural director for cultural philanthropy at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation in New York City. She works at the intersection of arts and political issues. Her practice has and continues to be infused with the courage for creative problem solving for social change. Her award-winning organization, the Laundromat Project, if you don't know about it, has placed art in places that are not always familiar to creativity. And I'll add my own little anecdote because I'm wearing here a shirt, and if you can read it, it says a South El Monte Arts Posse, where I did an artist in residency with several colleagues in east of LA. What this project entailed was working with high school students who wanted to historicize their own places, their own communities that were not necessarily familiar to their teachers or familiar to the people, right, who perhaps watched over them, right, kept their eye on them. We had a poetry slam, we had a dance party, and then we shared stories in historicizing their own place, historicizing their own community in what was an old riverbed that is now cemented over. So taking that and using it as inspiration, right, in the vision of the Laundromat Project to make art, wash clothes, and build community, I want for you all to help me in welcoming Risë Wilson, BA from Columbia University, MA from NYU, and inaugural director of cultural philanthropy at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation.
There's a lot of love in this room. I'm for it. Okay, so let me just. So, I guess first I just want to say thank you for having me here and inviting me here. First of all, I also should say that I think my speech is a little bit redundant. A lot of what you've heard so far, you're going to hear from me as well, and so there's some themes here. I really appreciate the intention of this conference itself and sparking us to be reflective in our practice. So I'm going to assume that there are people that are sort of occupying multiple roles within this universe of socially engaged art making. But for the purposes of my speech, I'm going to shorthand and treat us all as artists. And I think regardless of whether that's a moniker that you put on yourself, as Jane mentioned, this idea of always evolving our practice, of getting better. And so reflection is required to do that. So, though I had that lovely introduction, I do want to share a little bit more about who I am and how I come into this room. So you've already heard that I lead the philanthropy program at the Rauschenberg Foundation. And Robert Rauschenberg might not be synonymous with social change and activism, but he was an artist that really understood how to leverage the visibility and the platform that he had to draw attention to issues and causes that he cared about. And in my time at the foundation, I was able to launch a program called the Artist as Activist Fellowship, which is very much about resourcing artists who are applying their creative practice to a social challenge. And then, as you heard, I founded this organization called the Laundromat Project, which is very much about amplifying the creativity that already exists in communities of color and communities of low incomes, right? So I'm underlining these parts of my biography really to say that this is not an academic conversation for me, that I am also wrestling with ethics in my own practice. And this is very much the terrain of the artists that we support at the foundation. So it really was a privilege to be able to pause long enough to think through some of the decisions that I might have been making intuitively, but have not really stepped back to inventory and have more conscious intention around. I also, to that end, want to underline that this is very much a set of thoughts that are kind of like back of the napkin thoughts around ethics, right? So this is a work in progress for me to have an ethical practice, and I'm still, despite contributing to the journal Art in the Public Sphere, despite sort of making the case for why ethics are important, I'm still working out what does that look like in reality? How do we put that into practice? So today is really meant to be a set of opening remarks that can catalyze a collective exploration of this topic. And as I said, or sort of hinted at, I'm assuming that if you are here on a Friday, if you're using your summertime, that you are bought into the idea that ethics are necessary. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that terrain. And I would say if that is a question, which is a fair question, I would point you to the publication and to the launch party tonight, because there are a number of contributors, including myself, that really kind of cover that terrain. So the last preface I'm going to give before I just dive in is I also want to unpack a little bit of the terminology. So I really appreciate that we're talking about socially engaged art, and very deliberately I am not using the word social practice. Part of that is because I believe that socially engaged art making is a much bigger tent, and it leaves room for mural arts traditions, for protest music, for community arts, for a range of practices that are from the political to the esoteric. And social practice is a little bit like it is a gentrified term, right, that has been ascribed to the entire neighborhood, but in fact only represents one block, right? And it's one block made of mostly new construction. And that's fine, but that's one block, right? So the socially engaged art making is just a much more useful, in my mind, term, and brings more of us into the room. Ethics, on the other hand, is a little bit more challenging to unpack. And I appreciate that we're not afraid to use that word, but I want to acknowledge that it's a word that's a little bit like the boogeyman. It's a little bit, it gives you a sense of like, you're in trouble, right? That your character might be assassinated, right? Or like, not assassinated, but like, there's a poke at, you being a good person. And I think in the context of art making, there's a fear around censorship and artistic freedom, and will you really have the space to try things and to take risks, or will you be policed? And so I want to make sure that it's clear that the terrain of this conversation is really not around morality, it's not around politeness. And so what I think is at the heart of this topic is the issue of power. So in many ways, power is really the central concern of an ethical practice. if I don't have a conscious, purposeful approach to harnessing my personal and professional power, then it's hard to develop a do no harm approach to my work, right? And so what I would like to do in our time together is offer 3 core questions that can help us investigate how we're each using our power in order to do this work well. So question number 1, how am I deploying the resources that are available to me? And so in terms of resources, what I'm talking about are assets, privileges, and influence. And so to unpack that, when I say assets, I definitely mean material assets and money. That's lovely if you have it. But there are other kinds of assets as well, right? So there's our intellectual capital, there's our social capital relationships. There's access to space. If you've got a living room that you can offer, or a classroom that you can offer. If you've got a car and transportation. If you've got particular skill sets and technical knowledge that you're able to bring to bear. And then the unique talents that we each individually possess, right? That only we can bring into the room. So how am I deploying all those assets intentionally? Second part to that question. How do I spend my privileges in a conscious and concerted way to benefit the project I'm working on or the group I'm working with? So, for example, if I'm working on a protest, right? If I'm working on a project that involves some kind of civil disobedience, am I the person that can afford to get arrested? Am I someone that can afford bail? Will I not be deported if I get arrested? Do I have job security? So being able to be conscious of what you bring into the room, not as a deficit, but how do you leverage that privilege in the service of this larger goal? And on a more macro level, how do I use my privileges to end privilege itself, right? How do I work to level out the playing field and to make power more evenly distributed because I have the privilege to do so? Last part of that first question is how am I using my influence in a given situation? So I think influence is something that brings to mind, being able to whisper in someone's ear who's really important, right? But using my influence is also about who else do I bring into the room? Whose work am I citing, right? If I am in a gathering like this, being aware of who's not present, and so making sure that I, recognize who isn't here and call that up. And in all of these instances, from influence to assets to privileges, how do I deploy these resources and who is it for? So are my choices first and foremost about my own benefit? Is my first, impulse to hook up my friends, which is really about hooking up myself? And, do my choices really line up with the pursuit of an inherent fairness and equity? When are my choices redressing imbalances, past and present, and when are they upholding the status quo? So I think before I move on to the second question, I also want to underline that I'm not suggesting that to do this work well, we all have to be martyrs, and that we have to pretend that we don't have any personal stakes or interest or benefit. The ideal is that we work in ways that have mutual benefit, right? That we figure out some offering that is going to advance the goals of the group and also nourishes us as well, right? We're human. But I think what I want to pull up, and the point of these questions and inventory, is that our ethics really get tested when we're faced with a choice that isn't in our self-interest, where the outcome and doing the right thing isn't necessarily to our own advantage, but is the right thing to do, period. So that leads me to the second question in this power inventory, which is, what are the practices that help me do this, right? What are the practices that let me have a healthy power practice? So I'm going to offer 5. Clearly this is not exhaustive. And you've heard this before, but I'm going to underline it again. So remembering that context is king. So as Jane mentioned, what is an asset in one context is a liability in another, right? And I think that also underlines that all of our work is site-specific, no matter how you're working, whether it's from the social practice context or it is from, structural, working towards structural change. All of our work is site-specific, and further is moment-specific, right? It it boils down to, our strategies boil down to who's in the room at any given moment. And so, our ethical decisions really emerge from that context. The second piece I want to offer, the second practice I want to offer is cultivating multiple fluencies. It would be lovely if we were a country that actually spoke multiple languages. Our education system doesn't really allow for that, but great if you do. But at minimum, what I'm talking about is less about language and more about becoming fluent in multiple cultures, being fluent in multiple sectors, right? Being fluent in multiple disciplines. And I think the people in this room, by nature of this very program, are prone to explore across boundaries. But I think, again, doing that intentionally and cultivating that, seeking that out, is actually central to being able to bring real insight to our work, right? It's about moving beyond empathy, right? Being able to not just sort of say, I see you over the fence and I feel for you, and moving more towards a real genuine understanding and walking in that path to have insight to bring to that situation. The next practice I want to offer is, again, going back to this idea of courage. So it's the idea of bravery and self-possession. And so that really requires being deliberate in our actions, of knowing ourselves well and taking full claim to who we are, what we bring into the room, and for that matter, what we take. And this is absolutely something that is a trait of courage, in large part because self-possession requires an honest, candid inventory of who we are. I also think that bravery is required because to name that we are powerful is a courageous act. That we have far more agency in the world is something that we might not want to claim, because if we claim it, then we become responsible. And we really have to think through how are we contributing to the state of our neighborhood, our city, our country, our world. Tied to this idea of being at peace with who you are, for better or for worse, and at the same time understanding that that person, flawed human being, because to be human is to be flawed, as a powerful agent of change, is also the practice of humility, right? So paradoxically, even as you own all of that power, it is essential to remember, to sort of keep perspective that really in the grand scheme of things, we're all specks of dust, right? So we do our part, but we own our part. Full stop. And then the last idea that I want to pull up in this space is tied to the idea of humility as well, called the law of usefulness. It's the same idea of being in conferences like this, and I don't know if anyone has heard the phrase of step up, step back, right, when you're having group discussions, right? So it's that idea of being able to do that personal inventory to really examine, is what I'm offering in this moment useful? Is it actually to the benefit of everyone? Is this a little bit more about, I like to hear my voice? Or, and that can be expanded to whatever context, right? So really thinking about our work through the prism of service, and then self-editing if the impulse is guided by something else. And so the last, big question that I want to offer in this inventory, so we talked about the practices that allow me to have a healthy power practice, and now what I want to talk about are some of the obstacles that get in the way. So, what is getting in the way of me deploying my resources in a useful way? So, one of them is operating from lack and low expectations. So I talked about this idea of it taking courage to own that we are actually powerful. But I suspect that, I think this is part of our national culture, that few of us use our names and the word powerful in the same sentence. That's just sort of not part of our culture. I think there's, as I said, I think there's value in humility, but there's also some danger in not claiming that fully, and in having a sense of, especially as an artist in our art sector, that's always we're talking about how, we're broke, we don't have any money, and, living in the context that we are right now, where you can see sort of daily acts of state violence, right? and a kind of formal government that doesn't seem to be accountable to us, right? That doesn't seem to be accountable to anyone other than a large corporation or sort of money interests. It's very easy to feel like, how much can I actually do? How much can I actually do individually? And is this real? Is what I'm doing actually moving the needle on sort of massive structural challenges that we have? The danger of fully buying into this idea of limited agency is that I think it allows us to sort of be oblivious in our day-to-day actions, right? So if I really sort of believe that I don't have much impact, when I walk into a room, I really am not taking stock of how my interaction with you, the residue of that interaction, right? Even if I'm able to kind of come into something with great intentions and have great ideas on a sort of macro scale, in that one-on-one, if I don't know that I've just triggered you, right? If it's not my practice to be aware of just how much I bring into a room at any given time, it leaves room for lots of sloppiness with each other, and it gets in the way of the work that we're trying to do, right? And so building on that idea is what I'll call automatic thinking and doing, right? So these habits that we've cultivated over time that are unconscious at this point, right? And I think that despite the fact that arts and culture can be a very kind of cerebral space, right? And reading French philosophy, and we're theorizing about stuff, right? Like, when's the last time you saw meditation as a core course, right? When did you have to get grounded in working with your own mind and being awake, right? So I think being able to be intentional requires that kind of practice. And so I want to make a case for interrupting that kind of automatic doing and thinking. And I think another reason why this happens, beyond the sort of formal training that we can benefit from around being centered and being in the moment, is the perpetual time pressure that I think is part of our culture, right? So time pressure can lead to expediency, it can lead to doing things that are familiar, that prompts us to act from impulse. And so I think inherent in this entire conversation that we're having over the next 3 days is a requirement to slow down, right? I know that was the theme of last year's conference, and so time remains relevant to this topic as well. How do we lengthen the processes through which we make decisions that we really can be present in any given moment to make a conscious choice? And the last terrain that I want to cover is the idea of guilt. So, curious from a show of hands, how many people are familiar with Boondocks? Okay, all right, I like this audience a lot. So if you're not familiar with Boondocks, it is a cartoon with two little boys as a protagonist, one named Huey and a little brother named Riley. Actually, you don't need a backstory. All you need to know is that Riley is very precocious and says crazy things. And one of the things that he said in one of the strips was, guilt is a wasted emotion. But Riley's like 7, I should say that. Riley's like 7. So when I saw that a 7-year-old said, guilt is a wasted emotion, like I thought it was funny, I thought it was like a precocious thing for him to say, but I didn't really get it. But it stuck with me. And as it stuck with me, what I realized is that guilt is really, it's the gap between knowing what you should do and doing that thing, right? So guilt is what I feel when I want to make myself feel better, because I didn't do the right thing when I had the opportunity to, right? And so that's not useful, right? Like, I can either do the right thing in the moment, and if I didn't do it, correct that, and if I didn't do that, make peace with that. But just feeling guilty about it is sort of convincing myself that I'm still a good person, that I'm okay even though I didn't do the right thing. And so, you know, as I said, this is not the terrain about whether we're good people or not. If our, it's a little bit of like, yeah, it's like the three fish. Hope somebody is not locked out. So going back to this idea of guilt. So, you know, all I want to offer is that guilt is this kind of trick that we play on ourselves, right? It's a way of trying to make ourselves feel better. And, you know, when we have the grand ambitions that we do in the space of socially engaged art making, I think that we've got to put that aside and make peace with our decisions, right? Try to be as present as possible to do the right thing in that given moment, and then correct our mistakes, and then move on. So, as I sort of bring my ideas to a close, what I want to say is that, you know, I don't think that we all need to be convinced of the value of ethics, and I'm sure we don't need to be convinced of the value of harnessing our power well, but I do want to offer what a beautiful practice it would be if this was normal, right? If what we had were generations and generations of artists that went through programs like this one and came out with a very intentional, conscious way of working in community and with community. You know, talk about the complexities of this work, right? And so in my mind, that kind of practice is the practice that, you know, sheds the residue of bitterness, of guilt, of awkwardness, where there's really sort of truthful, candid, honest exchanges with people. And those kinds of projects, the projects that have traction and that last long after an arts organization is gone, long after, you know, each of us is gone. And that's really what we're all working towards, right? So again, as I offered before, in trying to reframe this conversation around ethics to be a conversation around power, it's also a conversation around aesthetics. The beauty of this work is really in the relationships that it creates, the structures that it interrupts and builds, and that's our project in the next 72 hours, right? And we wrestle with, you know, some of the questions I've raised, some of the questions that Jane has raised, the questions that will surface in the site visits, as we try to figure out what putting a ethical practice, you know, setting it into motion looks like. I hope that what we'll be motivated by is less obligation or a sense of guilt, or, you know, am I or even am I being useful, and more being inspired by the beauty of what is possible when we actually walk this way, right? When this is the way that we come to our craft. So that's the sum, that's the gist, and I'm hoping that, you know, in the next few minutes, if we still have time, that we can start this conversation, and certainly that over the next 3 days we really wrestle with these issues together. So thank you. So I don't want to stand in the way of food, but I also do think that this very much has to be a collective terrain, and I don't want to just sort of sit down and then we all disperse and sort of go our separate ways on these site visits. And so I'm curious how folks are thinking about this, if there's questions that folks had from what they've heard so far. We don't have a lot of time, but it would be great just to start the conversation. Sarah.
I just want to say thank you for bringing in the topic of mindfulness.
We're going to give you a mic.
And the speaker around.
No, you know, lots of different gears.
So I just want to thank you for bringing in the topic of mindfulness and how we walk in these conversations, because I feel like that is so intricately a part of power that we negate because of the responsibility, and it's so intertwined with privilege and being conscious of that. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
I'm just curious why you're observing that it's so tied up with those other things, just to not take that for granted.
Sure, I feel like because the capacity of privilege is a lot of the times the negate of that consciousness, of the responsibility of offering that to others. And that's what levels the playing field is, really giving space and creating space for others to walk in a way that they're not triggered, they're not made to be uncomfortable, but given that space to be in community.
Yeah, just really appreciate both the kind of strengths and the obstacles you bring up, and wondering kind of your thoughts about a lot of how you spoke of it was on an individual level and really, you know, at an internal space, and wondering how, when bringing a group of people together, whether it's, you know, all of us in this room or kind of more varying perspectives, you know, how you can account for and appreciate the different strengths, the different guilts that people bring, and kind of build collaboration with all of those in mind.
That's a great question. So there were a couple of moments where I defaulted into some habits and started using the word you, and that actually I was constantly trying not to. I mean, the reason why I'm using I language is because I can only claim my own experience, right? And in this terrain, I think, you know, coming up with prescriptions and being like, here's what ethics looks like. No, you go do it. You know, like, that's really problematic, right? And so I think if we actually do that image work for ourselves and own our own stuff, then we give permission for everyone else in the room to do that and to be that honest and to be, you know, that transparent. And then collectively we can get at it, but I can only offer my own. So that's our stomachs rumbling. Is it that time? Mm-hmm. All right, thank you.
Hi folks, my name is Daniel, thanks for being here. I just wanted to mention a little detail about lunch, because we hadn't quite talked through that yet. So there's a bunch of lunches lined up. If you, in the dining commons, if you take a left out of the auditorium, you'll go into the dining commons and then you'll see a bunch of boxes lined up on the right. You're welcome to stay here. You're also welcome to go outside. But you need to be back in front of Moore at 1:45 if you're going on a site visit, okay? A note about the content of the boxes. So many of you expressed your dietary needs in a general way, right? You are meaty, you're veggie, these kind of things. So there's a lot to accommodate those two poles. And then there's the level of hyper detail, right? Some of us have very specific needs. Now, there are only the lunches for those specific needs if people requested it in advance. So please refrain from showing up and then just asserting your specific desires in the lunch line if you did not order in advance. So if you find yourself in a tricky situation where you can't eat any of this stuff, let me know and I'll talk to the catering folks here at Moore. But just keep that in mind, that it isn't necessarily the moment to just totally pick and choose your own adventure, but we do hope that you will get what you need, and if you don't get what you need, then let me know. So let's give another round of applause to Risë Wilson. Risë agreed to take on the very challenging task of orienting us, right? We haven't even had a chance to say hi to our neighbors or anything like that, orienting us around some of the thematic questions that are going to guide the rest of the weekend, and we appreciate her for doing that. As Risë mentioned, there's going to be a number of publications that are released by Moore faculty and also members of the art public tonight at Eastern State Penitentiary, and one of those that she referenced is a journal called Art in the Public Sphere that was edited by one of our faculty members. Jonathan Wallace. You'll hear more about it tonight, so I won't give the plug, but I just wanted to give you some context that was, Risë wrote a really compelling essay in that issue of art in the public sphere and really helped us kind of, in the formulation stage of conceiving of how this gathering would happen. So we're really glad to be able to have these different kind of moments of contact and different forms that bring these ideas together, right? Writing, talking, eating. So, so without further ado, please go get your box lunches. And be mindful of some of the little ones that might be straggling from their summer camp outside.